Emily Thompson had always been a quiet observer of life, someone who preferred noticing the small details rather than making grand gestures. She grew up in a modest home in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and life seemed predictable most of the time. Her parents were simple people. Her father worked at the local factory, and her mother ran a small grocery store. From a young age, Emily noticed something fascinating. People often had more strength than they realized, but they rarely discovered it until circumstances forced them to. As a child, she would watch her father come home exhausted from long hours at the factory. He was a man of few words, someone who carried the weight of responsibility without complaint. Yet, whenever the family faced difficulties, a broken roof during a storm, a car that suddenly stopped working, or even the occasional illness, he found ways to manage. Emily saw him organize repairs, call in friends for help, and handle financial issues in ways that often left her amazed. She would sit quietly in the corner, taking mental notes, wondering why ordinary people didn't realize how much they could handle if they just tried. Emily's mother was different in her approach but equally powerful in her own way. She had a gentle strength, one that came from patience and quiet determination. Running a small grocery store was no easy task, especially in a town where everyone expected credit and delayed payments. But Emily's mother managed it all with a smile, keeping the shelves stocked, customers happy, and the household running smoothly. Watching her mother, Emily learned that strength didn't always roar, it could also whisper, persist, and endure. School life added another layer to Emily's understanding of human potential. She noticed that many students underestimated themselves. Some were naturally intelligent but lacked confidence. Others were shy or struggled socially, but when placed in a situation that required courage, they often surprised everyone, including themselves. Emily saw this happen in small ways. A student standing up to defend a friend, another speaking confidently in front of the class after weeks of hesitation, or a quiet student helping organize a class project successfully. These small moments fascinated her because they revealed that humans often had hidden capacities they didn't even know existed. When Emily grew older, she carried these observations into her career. She became a science teacher at the local high school, a decision driven not only by her love for science but also by her desire to inspire others. She loved the way science showed cause and effect, how understanding principles could help people navigate challenges. But more than anything, she loved watching students discover things about themselves. There was a special thrill in seeing a student struggle with a concept, then suddenly light up with understanding. The excitement in their eyes, the pride in their small victories, reminded her of what she had seen in her parents. That hidden strength often revealed itself in times of challenge in the town itself. Life was generally calm, almost too calm at times. The streets were lined with familiar faces, neighbors who greeted each other warmly, and children who played outside until the evening. But Emily knew that this calmness was deceptive. People often walked around believing they were powerless, waiting for someone else to solve problems or for life to happen to them. They didn't realize that even ordinary individuals, when faced with extraordinary situations, could become capable of remarkable actions. Emily's own life experiences had taught her this repeatedly. Even small acts, helping a neighbor, organizing a community event, or simply standing up for what was right, could ripple outward and create significant change. Emily often thought about human nature. She wondered why people were so unaware of their own power. Perhaps it was comfort that blinded them. When life is smooth and predictable, there is little incentive to test one's limits. Or maybe it was fear of failure, fear of embarrassment, fear of the unknown. Yet, in her heart, Emily believed that every person had reservoirs of strength and courage, waiting patiently for a moment when they would be needed. Her own life had shown her glimpses of this potential, and she longed to see it fully awakened in others. Her own personality reflected her observations. Emily was thoughtful, patient, and empathetic. She had an uncanny ability to sense when someone needed encouragement, often knowing what to say to give them confidence. Her students and neighbors alike respected her for it, not because she demanded respect, but because she quietly inspired it. She was the kind of person who noticed a struggling child in the classroom, an anxious friend at a gathering, or a frightened neighbor during an emergency, and instinctively knew how to guide them. She believed that human potential was not always about physical strength or intelligence, but also about courage, empathy, and persistence, the qualities that allowed people to rise to challenges they never expected to face. Emily also loved observing nature. She often took long walks along the riverbanks, marveling at how the smallest seed could grow into a towering tree, how the tiniest stream could carve through stone over time, and how animals adapted instinctively to survive. Nature, in many ways, reminded her of human potential. Just as rivers found ways around obstacles and seeds grew, despite harsh conditions, humans too could find strength and ingenuity in moments of need. These reflections often occupied her mind, reinforcing her belief that ordinary people were capable of extraordinary things, even if they didn't realize it. Her friends sometimes teased her for being idealistic. They would say, "Emily, people aren't that brave. Most just wait for someone else to handle things." But Emily would smile quietly. thinking of all the little victories she had witnessed: parents protecting their children, students standing up for fairness, neighbors coming together during crises. She knew that bravery and potential were like hidden fire, sometimes dormant, sometimes small, but always waiting for the right spark. Emily's own life was not without struggle. She had faced moments of doubt, loneliness, and failure, each of which tested her in unexpected ways. Yet, in every challenge, she discovered something about herself she hadn't known before. These experiences strengthened her belief that humans often underestimate themselves. In her view, people were like dormant volcanoes, seemingly calm on the surface, but capable of immense power when stirred by the right circumstances. She longed to see this power awaken in others, to witness ordinary people realizing they could achieve far more than they ever imagined. Over time, Emily became a subtle influencer in her community. She organized small events at the school, encouraged students to volunteer, and even quietly helped neighbors in need. She never sought recognition, but her actions spoke louder than words. People began to notice the difference one determined person could make, even in small ways. Emily believed that change started with awareness. Once people recognized their own potential, they could achieve remarkable things. What fascinated Emily most, however, was that most people went through life unaware of this hidden power. They underestimated themselves, avoided risks, and often waited for someone else to take the lead. She believed this was one of the most terrifying aspects of humanity, the untapped potential lying dormant within millions of ordinary individuals. If people truly understood their own strength, she thought, the world would look very different. Conflicts could be resolved more creatively, crises could be managed more effectively, and communities could grow stronger and more resilient. Emily's reflections were not abstract musings, they were grounded in real life. She had witnessed ordinary people perform extraordinary acts in emergencies, social efforts, and personal challenges. She had seen a shy student stand up to protect a bullied friend, a single parent find ways to care for their children against all odds, and neighbors come together to rebuild homes after minor accidents. Each story was a small testament to human potential, reinforcing her belief that the only thing stopping people was often their own lack of awareness. In this quiet, thoughtful way, Emily prepared herself for the world around her. She knew that life was unpredictable and that crises could arise at any moment. Yet she also knew that ordinary people, once awakened to their own abilities, could face these challenges with remarkable courage. She held on to this belief as a guiding principle, one that would soon be tested in ways she could never have anticipated by the time she was in her 30s. Emily had built a life rooted in observation, empathy, and quiet action. She had a small circle of friends who shared her outlook, a classroom full of students eager to learn, and a community that respected her wisdom. Yet, in her heart, she knew that her most important lesson had not yet been revealed. The true test of human potential, the moment when ordinary people could surprise themselves and others, was still ahead, and she was ready to witness it. With open eyes and a mind attuned to the incredible possibilities hidden in every human being. The spring had arrived with all its usual charm. The town Emily Thompson lived in looked calm and picturesque, with blooming flowers lining the sidewalks and the scent of fresh grass filling the air. Children played in open fields, neighbors waved at each other from their porches, and the local bakery released the warm, comforting aroma of fresh bread each morning. To an outsider, it was the perfect example of small-town serenity. But as Emily had learned over the years, calmness was often deceptive. Beneath the surface, small towns held vulnerabilities that could turn ordinary life upside down in a matter of hours. It started with the weather. The news had reported unusually heavy rainfall upstream, but no one in the town paid much attention. They were used to rains in spring, sometimes heavy, sometimes light, but nothing that could disrupt their daily lives. Emily, however, had always been a careful observer. She noticed the swollen river that ran along the outskirts of the town, how it had risen slightly faster than usual. She felt a quiet unease, though she tried not to alarm anyone. It's probably nothing, she thought, just an unusually wet season. She had learned that people often ignored early warnings, thinking things would resolve themselves. As the days passed, the rainfall increased. Dark clouds hung over the town for hours, sometimes days, pouring relentlessly. Emily watched from her classroom window as small streams near the edges of town began to overflow. At first, people treated it like a minor inconvenience. Streets became muddy, playgrounds were soggy, and farmers worried about their crops. But slowly, the water began to rise more dangerously. Basements flooded, low-lying roads became impassable, and the once charming river now gurgled and roared like a living creature, pressing against its banks. Emily felt a growing sense of urgency. She had taught her students about natural disasters, emergency preparedness, and the unpredictability of nature. She knew that even a small river could turn destructive if it overflowed unchecked. She tried to share her concern with her neighbors, mentioning the rising water levels and the importance of securing valuables and preparing for potential evacuations. Most people nodded politely but continued with their routines, reassuring themselves that nothing serious would happen. This reaction frustrated Emily. She knew that in moments like these, hesitation and denial could be dangerous. Within a week, the town began to experience the first real consequences of the storm. Roads connecting the town to nearby villages were washed out, isolating residents. Telephone lines and electricity became unreliable, sometimes flickering, sometimes cutting off completely. Shops began to close, not because of any threat of looting or crime, but simply because it was impossible to reach supplies. Grocery stores, bakeries, and pharmacies struggled to keep essential items available. Emily witnessed the first signs of panic in subtle ways: people rushing to stockpile groceries, neighbors arguing over access to generators, and friends who had once been close now snapping at each other over minor inconveniences. The town's emergency services were quickly overwhelmed. The local fire department had only a few boats suitable for rescue operations, and most of the police force was struggling to reach the hardest-hit areas. Emily realized that waiting for official help might not be enough. She began quietly thinking about contingency plans, how she and her neighbors could support each other if the situation worsened. She recalled stories of small towns around the country where communities had come together to survive floods, earthquakes, or other disasters. The key, she realized, was preparation and collaboration. Despite the growing danger, life continued in its usual rhythm. Children went to school in the mornings, though many arrived late because roads were blocked or muddy. Shops remained open, though shelves were emptying faster than usual. Families tried to maintain normal routines, cooking meals, doing laundry, and going about daily chores. This attempt to maintain normalcy was both admirable and dangerous. Emily noticed how people clung to the illusion of safety, pretending that everything was under control even as the river encroached closer to homes. This denial, she feared, could prevent them from taking critical action until it was too late. Emily herself had to balance her professional responsibilities with the growing awareness of the looming threat. She continued to teach her students, many of whom were increasingly distracted and anxious. Some were frightened by the rising waters near their homes. Others worried about family members who lived alone in vulnerable areas. Emily tried to remain calm and composed in the classroom, using lessons as an opportunity to discuss problem-solving, teamwork, and resilience. She emphasized the importance of being proactive rather than reactive, encouraging students to think ahead, make plans, and help others. She knew that these lessons could be the difference between safety and tragedy. At home, Emily took further precautions. She secured essential documents, stocked up on supplies, and began monitoring the river closely. She noticed small signs that indicated a worsening situation: water seeping into low-lying yards, debris floating downstream, and even local wildlife behaving strangely, fleeing higher ground in search of safety. Each observation reinforced her growing concern. She understood that the town's perception of safety was fragile and that the reality could become dangerous very quickly. Neighbors, however, were still divided in their response. Some were proactive, placing sandbags around their homes, moving furniture to higher floors, and preparing emergency kits. Others remained passive, hoping the situation would resolve itself or relying entirely on authorities to intervene. Emily tried to encourage a sense of community action, but she realized that fear and complacency were powerful barriers. People often underestimated what could happen until it was directly in front of them, a habit that had always concerned her. One afternoon, Emily took a walk along the riverbank to assess the situation firsthand. The scene was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The water, which had once seemed calm and inviting, was now churning violently. Fallen branches and debris were swept along the current, and muddy waves crashed against the riverbanks. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew that if the river overflowed completely, homes in the lower part of town would be at serious risk. And yet, many residents still acted as if nothing was wrong. Some children played near the edge of the water, while adults engaged in casual conversation, oblivious to the danger. Emily realized that a lack of awareness could be just as dangerous as the flood itself. The sense of impending crisis grew over the next few days. Rain continued unabated, and the river rose higher and higher. Emergency warnings were issued on the radio, urging residents to evacuate vulnerable areas. Some families took the warnings seriously, packing their belongings and seeking shelter with friends or relatives. Others hesitated, unwilling to leave behind possessions or unsure of where to go. Emily could feel the tension building like a storm before a thunderclap. It was as if the entire town stood on the edge of a precipice, waiting for a spark to push them into action. Emily spent her evenings planning quietly, thinking of how she could help if the worst occurred. She organized a small list of neighbors willing to check on elderly residents, ensure pets were safe, and help move essential supplies to higher ground. She even spoke to a few students who lived in flood-prone areas, guiding them and their families on what precautions to take. Emily understood that when disaster strikes, preparation and quick thinking could save lives. She also knew that ordinary people, when faced with extraordinary circumstances, could rise above fear and take action they never imagined themselves capable of. Meanwhile, the town's atmosphere became increasingly tense. The community that had once been so familiar and comforting now felt precarious. People whispered about rising water levels, shared rumors about blocked roads, and argued over limited resources. The flood had begun to expose not only the town's physical vulnerabilities but also the fragility of human behavior under stress. Emily noticed that stress revealed both the best and worst in people. Some became heroic, helping neighbors and strangers alike, while others succumbed to panic, selfishness, or denial. It fascinated and worried her at the same time. Despite the growing tension, Emily remained focused. She continued teaching, checking on neighbors, and observing the river. She could feel a storm approaching, not just in the weather but in the human response to the crisis. This realization strengthened her resolve. She knew that the coming days would test the town in ways they could not yet imagine, and she wanted to ensure that as many people as possible could navigate the challenge safely. Then, one evening, after a particularly heavy downpour, Emily noticed that the river had risen to an unprecedented level. Water lapped dangerously close to homes, and some streets were already flooded. The reality of the situation could no longer be ignored. Panic began to set in among some residents, while others froze in disbelief. It was at this point that Emily realized the early situation had escalated into a genuine crisis. The town's sense of calm had been shattered, and the human response to danger was about to be tested. Emily understood that this moment marked the beginning of a true test of human potential. People would have to confront their fears, act decisively, and perhaps discover strengths they didn't know they had. Ordinary residents would be faced with extraordinary challenges, and their actions in the coming hours and days could determine not just their own survival but that of their neighbors as well. Emily felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. She had always believed in the hidden power within people, and now, that belief was about to be tested in the most real and urgent way. The town, once serene and predictable, was now on the brink of chaos. Rain, rising waters, and infrastructure challenges created a dangerous environment, while human reactions ranged from fear and denial to courage and initiative. Emily realized that the coming events would reveal the true measure of the town's residents, their resourcefulness, courage, and capacity for collaboration. And as she looked around at her neighbors and students, she felt a quiet hope. In moments of crisis, ordinary people often became extraordinary. She just hoped the town would awaken to that reality before it was too late. The floodwaters that had once seemed manageable were now becoming truly threatening. The river, which Emily had watched for days, was no longer contained by its banks. It surged violently, sweeping debris, branches, and even small trees along with it. Each morning, Emily woke to a town that looked different, as though the rising water had already begun reshaping the familiar streets, gardens, and playgrounds. What had once been orderly and calm now carried a sense of urgency and danger. The townspeople's reactions were varied, and it quickly became clear that fear was taking hold. Some residents had started leaving their homes for higher ground, while others refused to budge, clinging stubbornly to familiar places and routines. Emily walked through the streets in the early hours of the morning, checking on neighbors. She saw an elderly man standing at the edge of his porch, gazing at the water as if hoping it would recede on its own. A young mother struggled to carry groceries through the rising puddles, uncertain of where to place her children safely. Panic, confusion, and indecision were spreading like a shadow over the town. As Emily helped her neighbors with sandbags and other protective measures, she noticed the first cracks in human behavior under pressure. Arguments erupted over seemingly trivial matters. Two neighbors fought over whose property should be prioritized for sandbagging. Families argued about whether to evacuate or stay. Some people hoarded resources, fearing that others might take what they needed most. The atmosphere, once friendly and calm, was now tense, heavy with fear and frustration. Emily felt a sense of urgency she had never experienced before. She knew that in moments like these, the difference between calm, organized action and chaos could be a matter of life and death. Schools and public buildings, which normally offered safety and stability, were beginning to feel the impact of the flood. Roads leading to these buildings were becoming impassable, forcing students and teachers to make difficult decisions about how to get to school or return home safely. Emily had tried to continue her teaching as long as possible, believing that routine might help calm students and maintain a sense of normalcy. But with water creeping closer to the school and reports of flooded streets, she realized that no routine could continue in the face of nature's relentless power. Emily spent long hours coordinating with neighbors, trying to help the town prepare for what she could now see was an inevitable emergency. She created lists of people who needed assistance, including the elderly, the sick, and families with young children. Volunteers were assigned to check on homes, distribute supplies, and monitor the rising water levels. But coordination was difficult. Communication lines were failing, phones often went dead, and the flow of information was slow and confusing. Emily quickly realized that even when people wanted to help, human limitations could make the situation chaotic. The human toll of the rising waters began to show itself in subtle but alarming ways. Some families had to make quick decisions about what to save from their homes. Furniture, important documents, and cherished possessions were left behind as they sought safety. The emotional strain was visible on every face. Children clung to their parents with wide, fearful eyes, unsure of what would happen next. Adults who had always been calm and confident seemed suddenly vulnerable, questioning their own abilities and choices. Emily felt a profound sadness witnessing this, but she also knew that fear could sometimes bring out remarkable courage in people. The conflict between fear and action became most evident when the first rescues were needed. One afternoon, Emily saw a neighbor trapped on the roof of his home, surrounded by rising water. Panic surged through the gathered crowd. Some people hesitated, unsure if they could safely help. Others began yelling instructions, creating confusion and tension. Emily realized that human fear, when combined with uncertainty, could paralyze even capable people. She took a deep breath and decided to step forward, coordinating a rescue effort using nearby boats and ropes. The successful rescue of that neighbor, though small, inspired a wave of cautious confidence among the townspeople. It was a moment that hinted at the latent potential within ordinary people, waiting to be awakened. Even as courage emerged, the flood continued to escalate. Water seeped into homes, forcing residents to move to higher floors. Streets became rivers, and the familiar layout of the town was obscured by the murky, swirling currents. Emergency services were stretched to the limit, unable to respond to every call for help. Emily began realizing the harsh truth. The town could not rely entirely on outside help. People would need to act themselves, and they would need to do it quickly. The flood was no longer just a natural disaster, it had become a test of human resilience, cooperation, and ingenuity. Conflict among neighbors intensified under these pressures. Some residents prioritized their own families over others, refusing to share resources or information. Others argued about evacuation routes and who should receive limited help first. Emily witnessed heated disputes among people who had once been friendly, showing how quickly fear could erode trust. Yet, amidst the tension, small acts of heroism began to appear. A group of teenagers helped carry elderly neighbors to safety. A mother stayed calm to reassure frightened children. Ordinary individuals, when confronted with extraordinary circumstances, were beginning to demonstrate courage they didn't know they possessed. Emily also faced her own internal conflict during these days. She had always believed in human potential, but now she was seeing how fragile it could be when fear and chaos took hold. Doubts crept in. Was she doing enough? Could she really help make a difference? Could ordinary people rise to the challenge in time? Despite these fears, she reminded herself that even small actions could ripple outward, inspiring others and saving lives. This belief became her guiding principle as she continued to work tirelessly to support her community. As the floodwaters reached new heights, the human toll increased. Families were forced to evacuate in the dark, wading through cold, fast-moving water. Pets were lost, and cherished belongings were destroyed. Some people fell ill due to stress and exhaustion. Tensions ran high as resources dwindled. Emily watched as neighbors who had once been strangers now relied on each other for survival. She saw the raw, unfiltered side of humanity: fear, selfishness, courage, and compassion all existing side by side. It was a chaotic mix, but it also revealed the incredible capacity people had to adapt under pressure. The rising conflict was not just external, it was deeply personal as well. Emily found herself questioning her own limits, wondering if she could physically and emotionally sustain the effort needed to help the community. She experienced moments of exhaustion, frustration, and fear. Yet each challenge seemed to awaken a deeper reservoir of determination. She realized that the flood was testing everyone, not just in their ability to act, but in their awareness of their own strength. Ordinary people, when pushed to their limits, often discovered capabilities they never knew existed. One day, as the flood reached the highest levels anyone had seen in decades, Emily witnessed a particularly striking moment. A small group of neighbors had banded together to rescue a family trapped in their home. Panic and fear were evident on their faces, yet they moved with surprising coordination, using makeshift rafts and ropes. Emily watched, amazed, as ordinary residents executed a plan that seemed impossible just hours earlier. She realized that crises had a way of bringing out both the best and the worst in people, but that the potential for greatness was always there, hidden beneath uncertainty and doubt. The rising conflict also highlighted the delicate balance between chaos and cooperation. While some people hoarded resources or argued over priorities, others collaborated in remarkable ways. Volunteers set up temporary shelters, shared food, and checked on neighbors who might have been overlooked. Children helped parents carry supplies. Strangers offered assistance without hesitation. Emily saw firsthand that while fear could divide, it could also unite. People, when faced with a common threat, could tap into strength, creativity, and courage far beyond what they imagined possible. Despite the growing danger, Emily continued to act as a calming presence. She encouraged neighbors to organize, reminded people of the importance of teamwork, and helped prioritize the most urgent needs. She realized that in moments of rising conflict, leadership, quiet, persistent, and empathetic, was crucial. People needed someone to help them focus, to channel their fear into constructive action, and to believe in their own abilities. Emily became that guiding presence, even as she grappled with her own doubts and exhaustion. The rising conflict reached its peak when reports came of a particularly dangerous section of the town being threatened. Homes in low-lying areas were completely surrounded by water, and families were trapped. Panic spread rapidly, and fear threatened to paralyze the community. Emily knew that decisive action was required, or tragedy was inevitable. She helped organize a group of volunteers, coordinating efforts to rescue those in danger. The operation was risky, physically demanding, and emotionally draining, but it revealed a profound truth. Ordinary people, when faced with extraordinary challenges, could rise to the occasion in ways they never thought possible. Throughout these days, Emily witnessed moments of human resilience, bravery, and selflessness interwoven with fear, panic, and confusion. The town's familiar rhythm had been disrupted, but in its place emerged a new dynamic one where survival depended on courage, collaboration, and the willingness to act despite uncertainty. Emily felt a mix of awe and apprehension. She understood that the rising conflict was shaping not just the physical outcome of the flood, but also the very character of the people involved. Emily could see that the rising conflict had transformed the town. The flood had revealed the strengths and weaknesses of its residents, showing that fear and chaos could coexist with courage and ingenuity. People had begun to realize that their actions mattered, that they could make a difference even when the situation seemed hopeless. Emily understood that the coming days would demand even more from everyone. The true test of human potential was approaching, and the flood was about to push ordinary people to the edge of their capabilities, forcing them to confront both their fears and their hidden power. The town was in danger. Fear was widespread, and human emotions were volatile. Yet it had also shown the remarkable capacity for heroism, teamwork, and resilience. Emily reflected quietly on the events of the past days, realizing that while the flood was terrifying, it had also revealed something extraordinary. Humans often didn't know their own power until they were tested, and in this rising conflict, that hidden strength was beginning to awaken, hinting at the incredible feats that might follow when ordinary people were pushed beyond their limits. The flood had reached a level that no one in the town had ever experienced before. The river, which had quietly flowed through their lives for decades, was now a raging, uncontrollable force. Water surged into streets, homes, and fields, carrying with it mud, debris, and even the remnants of smaller structures from upstream. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and mildew, mixed with the faint scent of smoke from a chimney that had caught fire when water damaged the wiring inside a house. The town had reached a critical point, and for the first time, many people understood that their lives were in immediate danger. Emily Thompson felt the weight of responsibility more acutely than ever. She had been preparing for emergencies in her mind for days, but the reality now was far beyond what she had imagined. She walked through the flooded streets, observing the chaos firsthand. Children clung to their parents, tears streaking their muddy faces. Elderly residents sat in upper rooms, watching helplessly as the water crept higher. Families huddled together, unsure whether to attempt evacuation or wait for help that might not arrive in time. Emily's heart pounded with fear and urgency. She knew that hesitation now could have irreversible consequences. The breaking point came when a sudden surge of water swept through one of the main streets, trapping several families in their homes. Panic erupted instantly. Shouts echoed through the town as people tried desperately to reach safety. Some ran through the flood, only to be caught by deeper currents. Others attempted to move belongings or rescue neighbors, only to find the water faster and stronger than they anticipated. Emily saw a child stranded on the roof of a small house, screaming for help as the water churned around the structure. The sight of that child, helpless and terrified, ignited something inside Emily and the group of neighbors who had gathered to respond. This was no longer just a dangerous situation, it was a life-or-death moment that demanded immediate action. Ordinary people suddenly faced extraordinary decisions. Panic caused arguments to flare among neighbors. Some blamed each other for not preparing sooner, while others accused authorities of neglect. Fear made even small decisions seem monumental. Yet in the midst of this chaos, Emily saw something remarkable. Certain individuals stepped forward instinctively, setting aside their fear to act. A group of teenagers, who had been hiding in fear moments earlier, now carried ropes and guided families to temporary safety. A father waded into waist-deep water to rescue a neighbor trapped with her infant. These acts of bravery were spontaneous and raw, born from the necessity of survival. It was as if the flood had unlocked something within them, courage they had never known they possessed. Emily herself took charge, moving decisively to organize rescue efforts. She directed volunteers to form chains, using ropes and makeshift rafts to bring stranded families to higher ground. She coordinated efforts to clear debris and secure dangerous areas. Every moment was critical. One wrong step could mean disaster for herself or someone else. Emily felt her own fear rise and fall with each passing second, but she kept it under control, focusing on action rather than panic. She realized that in this breaking point, calm leadership could save more lives than anything else. That as the hours passed, the floodwaters continued to rise. Buildings that had seemed sturdy moments ago began to give way to the relentless pressure of water. Roofs collapsed, walls cracked, and foundations weakened. People had to make split-second decisions about where to move, what to save, and whom to help first. Emily witnessed families making heartbreaking choices, leaving behind pets, prized possessions, or even certain belongings that could not be carried. The emotional strain was immense, yet the human instinct to survive and protect others shone through. Strangers became allies, sharing resources, offering shelter, and guiding each other through the murky waters. The breaking point was not only physical but emotional. The town had never experienced such intense pressure, and the psychological toll was apparent. People screamed, cried, and argued, often simultaneously. Fear and desperation were overwhelming. Yet amidst this turmoil, Emily noticed moments of extraordinary clarity and determination. Some residents, despite their fear, remained focused on helping others. They communicated efficiently, acted decisively, and inspired those around them to do the same. Emily realized that crisis had a way of revealing true character, stripping away superficial concerns and exposing the raw essence of human capability. One of the most striking moments came when a family of 4 was trapped in a partially submerged house. The father attempted to swim through the strong current but was nearly swept away. Emily, alongside a few strong neighbors, formed a human chain, linking hands to reach the family safely. The coordination required careful timing, trust, and courage. Each person risked their own life to save others. In that moment, Emily saw the incredible power of collective human effort. Ordinary people, when united by a common goal and driven by urgency, could accomplish feats that would have seemed impossible in ordinary circumstances. The breaking point also exposed the fragility of unpreparedness. Some residents had delayed evacuation, thinking the water would recede or that authorities would manage the situation. Now faced with the full force of nature, they were overwhelmed and panicked. Emily understood that fear could immobilize, but action, even small, imperfect action, was always better than inaction. She worked tirelessly to encourage hesitant neighbors, guiding them to safety and helping them understand that their hidden strength was sufficient to meet the crisis amid the chaos. Emily realized that the breaking point was a test of human awareness and self-belief. People often underestimated their abilities, assuming they would be helpless in the face of danger. Yet here, in the flood's fury, she witnessed countless examples of resilience, resourcefulness, and courage. Ordinary citizens were performing extraordinary acts, a teenager improvising a raft from debris, a grandmother navigating her way through a submerged alley to help a neighbor, a shopkeeper sharing his remaining food with those stranded. Emily saw that the real power of humans often lies dormant, only surfacing when circumstances demand it. The physical exhaustion was immense. Emily had been moving continuously for hours, lifting, wading through water, coordinating efforts, and ensuring that no one was left behind. Her muscles ached, her clothes were soaked and heavy, and her skin was raw from constant contact with cold, debris-filled water. Yet the adrenaline and the urgency of the moment kept her going. She knew that stopping for even a moment could cost someone their life. The breaking point was as much about endurance and persistence as it was about courage and skill. The flood's impact extended beyond the streets and homes. It affected the very community fabric. Families were separated, friends lost contact, and communication was nearly impossible. Yet, Emily noticed that adversity often created unexpected bonds. Strangers became collaborators, neighbors became protectors, and the collective effort of the town began to take shape. The breaking point had not only revealed human vulnerability but also highlighted the extraordinary capacity for empathy, cooperation, and leadership under extreme stress. Emily also observed the emotional transformations occurring within individuals. Fear was a constant presence, but it was intertwined with determination, hope, and resilience. Some residents, who had always considered themselves ordinary, demonstrated remarkable bravery. They rescued others, provided guidance, and maintained calm amidst the chaos. Emily realized that extreme situations could awaken hidden qualities, allowing people to perform beyond what they believed possible. The flood had become both a challenge and a revelation, exposing the depths of human potential. One evening, after a particularly intense day of rescue and coordination, Emily took a moment to catch her breath. She looked around at the flooded streets, the exhausted neighbors, and the families huddled together. The destruction was immense, yet the spirit of the town remained unbroken. People were tired, scared, and unsure of what the next hour might bring, but they were alive, and they were acting. Emily felt a profound sense of awe at what she had witnessed. The breaking point had pushed everyone to their limits, revealing both the fragility and strength inherent in ordinary humans. The breaking point was also a moment of reflection for Emily herself. She thought about her earlier beliefs regarding human potential. She had always known that people had hidden reserves of courage and resilience, but seeing it unfold in real time under life-threatening conditions was transformative. Humans, she realized, often underestimate what they can achieve until they are faced with circumstances that demand it. The flood had stripped away comfort, routine, and safety, revealing the raw capability of people to rise, adapt, and survive. The breaking point reached its peak. The water was at its highest, and the town teetered on the edge of disaster. Yet, in the midst of danger and fear, moments of hope emerged. Families were reunited. Volunteers guided stranded residents to safety, and small victories began to accumulate. Emily realized that the breaking point was not only a moment of crisis but also a turning point, a time when ordinary humans, pushed to their limits, could discover strength, courage, and ingenuity that had always existed within them. Emily understood the profound lesson the flood had imparted. The breaking point had revealed a terrifying and inspiring truth about humans. They often do not know their own power until circumstances force them to confront it. Fear could paralyze, but action could liberate. Ordinary individuals, when united by purpose and urgency, could achieve extraordinary feats. The flood had tested the town physically, emotionally, and mentally, and in doing so, that had awakened a deep understanding of human potential that would resonate long after the waters receded. After days of relentless rain, chaos, and fear, the floodwaters began to slowly recede. It was not immediate or dramatic, but a gradual lowering that allowed the townspeople to finally breathe a little easier. The once roaring river was still swollen and dangerous, but its force had diminished enough for people to begin assessing the damage and, more importantly, to start thinking about recovery. Emily Thompson felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She had survived the breaking point and witnessed the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. But the town was far from restored, and the challenges ahead were immense. In the early hours of the morning, Emily walked through the streets, her boots sinking slightly into the mud left behind by the flood. The town looked different, almost unrecognizable in some areas. Streets were littered with debris, branches, broken furniture, and scattered personal belongings. Some homes had suffered extensive damage, with walls partially collapsed and basements completely submerged. Yet, amidst this destruction, Emily noticed something remarkable. People were already beginning to take action. Residents were stepping outside, talking to neighbors, and assessing what needed to be done next. The breaking point had passed, but the spirit of determination had only grown stronger. Emily joined a group of neighbors who had organized a temporary relief station at the community center. The building had been spared major flooding, making it a safe place for families to gather, receive food, and share information. Volunteers distributed blankets, water, and dry clothing. Children, though shaken by the events of the past days, were slowly beginning to smile and play again under the watchful eyes of adults. Emily realized that this phase the resolution was not just about dealing with physical damage, but also about restoring a sense of normalcy, hope, and safety to the community. One of the first steps in resolution was checking on the most vulnerable residents. Emily and her volunteers moved through the streets, helping elderly neighbors clean up mud from their homes, rescuing pets that had been trapped, and ensuring that families without resources received basic necessities. It was exhausting work, but Emily felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing the community come together. People who had argued and panicked during the flood were now cooperating, motivated by a shared goal: recovery and rebuilding. This shift from fear to purposeful action was the essence of the resolution phase. As the day progressed, Emily helped coordinate temporary shelters for those whose homes had been severely damaged. The local school gymnasium and town hall were converted into makeshift living spaces, with cots, blankets, and food supplies arranged as efficiently as possible. Volunteers worked tirelessly, setting up cooking stations, medical aid points, and play areas for children. Emily saw families who had once been strangers sharing space peacefully, helping one another, and offering encouragement. The flood, which had created chaos and fear, was now bringing out a different kind of human power: the ability to collaborate, adapt, and rebuild together. The emotional recovery was as important as the physical cleanup. Emily spent time with residents who had been traumatized by the flood, listening to their stories, calming fears, and encouraging them to focus on what they could control. She noticed that people were beginning to feel empowered in ways they hadn't before. Those who had been forced to act during the breaking point, whether rescuing neighbors, protecting family members, or improvising solutions in dangerous situations, now realized that they had capabilities they hadn't known existed. They had survived, they had helped others survive, and they had done so despite fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty. The resolution phase also involved practical problem solving. Roads that had been submerged or washed away needed to be cleared. Utilities had to be restored, and damaged homes required immediate attention. Emily helped coordinate teams for these tasks, assigning volunteers to various neighborhoods based on urgency. Some residents were skilled with tools and machinery, while others contributed by organizing supplies, preparing meals, or offering emotional support. Every action mattered, and Emily observed how the flood had unintentionally revealed hidden talents within the community. People were stepping into roles they had never imagined, demonstrating resilience and creativity in every task. While some recovery work was ongoing, Emily also witnessed moments of celebration. Small victories, such as rescuing a trapped pet, clearing a particularly dangerous street, or helping a family salvage important belongings, were met with relief and quiet joy. Even amidst destruction, these victories reminded the town that progress was possible. Emily saw smiles on faces that had been clouded with fear just days earlier. Laughter, though tentative at first, returned to the streets. The community was learning that while disaster could disrupt life, it could also bring people together, creating bonds stronger than before. Emily also reflected on the personal growth she had witnessed. Children who had been frightened by the flood were now showing surprising resilience. They helped carry supplies, guided younger siblings, and offered support to adults who were exhausted. Adults who had once doubted their own abilities now realized their resourcefulness and strength. Even those who had panicked initially learned from the experience, gaining confidence in their capacity to act under pressure. Emily felt a profound sense of fulfillment witnessing this transformation. The flood had tested every individual, and now, through resolution, the town was discovering the hidden power within its people. One particularly moving moment came when the first families returned to their partially damaged homes. They had feared losing everything, but seeing their neighbors' support and the temporary safety measures in place gave them courage. Emily helped organize small teams to repair homes just enough to make them livable. Furniture was moved to higher floors. Makeshift barriers were erected to prevent further flooding, and essential utilities were restored where possible. The process was painstaking, but it demonstrated the community's ability to work collectively, problem-solve creatively, and take responsibility for one another. Emily, who had acted decisively during the breaking point, continued to play a central role. Her calm presence, practical advice, and unwavering support inspired confidence among volunteers and residents alike. She encouraged people to focus on what they could do immediately rather than worrying about what was beyond their control. Her leadership was not authoritarian. It was grounded in empathy, collaboration, and empowerment. People felt capable, supported, and motivated to contribute in any way they could. Food and water distribution became a critical part of resolution. Some homes had been cut off from supplies for days, and temporary shelters needed a constant flow of essentials. Emily coordinated with volunteers to establish a rotation for collecting, cooking, and distributing meals. People who had once doubted their own abilities were now actively participating. Whether by carrying supplies, preparing meals, or assisting in distribution, the flood had shown them that even small contributions could make a significant difference. Every action mattered, reinforcing the lesson that humans often underestimate their impact and potential. Medical assistance was another crucial aspect of the resolution. Minor injuries, waterborne illnesses, and stress-related ailments were prevalent among residents. Emily worked with a few trained volunteers to set up a first aid station in the community center. People came for treatment, advice, or simply a moment of reassurance. The collective effort not only addressed immediate physical needs but also created a sense of security. Residents realized that while the flood had been terrifying, it had also shown them the strength of community and the importance of mutual support. Emily reflected on the lessons of the past week. The flood had been catastrophic, but it had also revealed an essential truth. Humans often do not recognize their own potential until faced with extreme challenges. People who had once doubted themselves discovered courage, ingenuity, and resilience. Neighbors who had been strangers became allies. Families, friends, and volunteers collaborated in ways that had seemed impossible in normal circumstances. Emily understood that this revelation, the recognition of human power and potential, was as significant as the physical recovery itself. Emily also recognized the role of small, consistent efforts in the resolution. The flood had required immediate, heroic action during the breaking point, but rebuilding demanded persistence, patience, and attention to detail. Clearing streets, repairing homes, preparing meals, and providing emotional support were ongoing tasks. Each contribution, no matter how small, added to the collective recovery. Emily saw that ordinary actions, when sustained and coordinated, could create extraordinary outcomes. Humans had been capable all along. The flood had only shown them how. The community began holding small gatherings to assess damage, share resources, and discuss long-term plans. These meetings were filled with collaboration, encouragement, and creative problem-solving. Emily noticed that people were no longer paralyzed by fear. They had discovered agency and capability within themselves. The flood had shifted the town's mindset. People realized that while disasters could disrupt life, they also had the power to respond, adapt, and rebuild stronger than before. Emily also reflected on the personal changes within herself. She had faced fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty, yet she had acted decisively and inspired others to do the same. She realized that human potential was not just about physical strength or knowledge, it was about empathy, resilience, creativity, and courage. The resolution phase had reinforced her belief that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they recognized their own power and worked together. The town had taken significant steps toward recovery. Streets were being cleared, shelters were functioning efficiently, and families were regaining a sense of security. The flood had not ended entirely, but the immediate threat had passed. Emily walked through the town, observing the transformation. Where fear and chaos had once dominated, determination and cooperation now prevailed. Ordinary people had risen to meet extraordinary challenges, discovering abilities and strengths they had never realized they possessed. Emily understood that the resolution was more than just a practical recovery. It was a transformation of the town's spirit. People had seen themselves as capable, resourceful, and resilient. They had learned that even in the face of overwhelming danger, they could act decisively, support one another, and overcome adversity. The flood had revealed the terrifying and inspiring truth about humans: most do not know the power that lies within them until they are tested. Emily also helped people plan for the future. Emergency plans were discussed, flood barriers were reinforced, and community networks were strengthened. People realized that awareness, preparation, and collaboration were essential for navigating future challenges. The resolution was not just about surviving the flood, it was about learning, growing, and discovering potential that had always been within them, waiting to be awakened. By the end of the day, as the sun broke through lingering clouds, Emily stood on a small hill overlooking the town. She saw families working together, children playing cautiously near higher ground, and volunteers coordinating cleanup efforts. The town was battered but alive. The flood had tested every individual, revealing fear, courage, and resilience in equal measure. The breaking point had passed, and now, through resolution, the town had discovered its capacity to act, endure, and rebuild. Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Humans, she realized, were capable of more than they could ever imagine. All they needed was a situation that forced them to recognize it. The flood had finally passed. The rains stopped, the river began to shrink back into its banks, and the streets of the town slowly became visible again. Though they were covered in mud and debris, the immediate danger was over, and for the first time, the people could take a deep breath. Emily Thompson walked slowly through her neighborhood, taking in the scene. Houses were damaged, gardens were flattened, and familiar streets looked almost unrecognizable. Yet, amidst the destruction, there was a quiet sense of relief and accomplishment. Life had not returned to normal, but it had returned to possibility. The aftermath of the flood was a time for reflection, healing, and understanding, and Emily knew that this phase was just as important as the crisis itself. The first thing Emily noticed was the resilience of the people. Families who had been terrified during the rising floodwaters were now working together to repair their homes and clean their neighborhoods. Neighbors who had once barely spoken were now exchanging tools, helping carry debris, and offering food and water to one another. Emily saw children helping their parents sweep mud from floors, pick up broken furniture, and salvage what they could. The human spirit, she realized, was extraordinarily adaptable. In the aftermath, the fear and panic that had dominated the breaking point were replaced with determination, cooperation, and a newfound sense of empowerment. Emily spent much of her time helping coordinate cleanup efforts. Streets had to be cleared of fallen branches, mud, and other debris, while homes needed urgent repairs. She worked alongside volunteers, moving furniture, assisting families, and distributing resources. Every small action seemed meaningful, and she noticed that people had become more confident in their abilities. Tasks that had seemed overwhelming during the flood were now approached methodically and with purpose. The flood had forced ordinary individuals to discover strengths and problem-solving skills they hadn't known they possessed. In the aftermath, these abilities were no longer hidden, they were visible, tangible, and effective. The emotional aftermath was equally significant. Emily walked through homes where families were still shaken, children clinging nervously to their parents, and elderly residents uncertain about what the future held. She listened patiently to their stories of fear and bravery, validating their experiences and encouraging them to focus on recovery rather than loss. People began to reflect on their own actions during the flood. Some were amazed at what they had accomplished, rescuing neighbors, protecting children, or even helping strangers. Others felt guilt or regret over moments of hesitation or fear. Emily gently reminded them that every human being reacts differently under stress, and the courage they had shown was already extraordinary. In the days following the flood, the town slowly began to repair itself. Schools reopened with makeshift classrooms, community centers served as temporary hubs for information and resources, and local businesses worked to recover from the damage. Emily observed the transformation with quiet pride. The aftermath was not just about physical repair, it was about the collective rebuilding of confidence, trust, and the sense of community that had been tested by the crisis. People were discovering that their own efforts, combined with collaboration, could overcome challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. Emily also noticed that the flood had changed relationships. Friendships had deepened as people had relied on each other for survival. Neighbors who had argued during the rising waters were now working together to repair roads or clear debris. Strangers had become allies through acts of courage and support. Emily understood that crisis could strip away superficial barriers, revealing the essential truth that humans were capable of extraordinary empathy and cooperation. The flood had shown them what they could do when they put aside fear, hesitation, and personal convenience to focus on the greater good. Reflection became a constant part of Emily's own experience. She thought about how ordinary people often underestimate their own power. The flood had been terrifying, yet it had illuminated the incredible potential within each person. The teenagers who had rescued neighbors, the parents who had navigated rising waters to protect their children, the elderly who had calmly guided others despite their own fear. All of these examples demonstrated that humans often possess courage and resilience far beyond what they believe. Emily realized that the most terrifying thing about humans was not their vulnerability, but their lack of awareness of the strength that lay within them, until circumstances demanded it. Emily also reflected on the lessons of preparation and awareness. Many residents had initially underestimated the flood, delaying action and assuming the worst would pass. Those delays had made the breaking point more dangerous, but they also served as powerful lessons. People realized that understanding risks, preparing for emergencies, and recognizing their own capabilities could prevent panic and save lives in the future. The flood had forced the town to confront its own assumptions about safety, responsibility, and human power. Emily felt that this awareness, though hard-earned, would leave a lasting impact on the community. During the aftermath, Emily helped organize small community meetings. Residents shared their experiences, discussed lessons learned, and brainstormed strategies for future emergencies. The conversations were rich with insight and honesty. People spoke about fear, mistakes, bravery, and unexpected solutions. Emily encouraged them to recognize the hidden potential they had displayed, to see that courage was not only an abstract idea but a tangible reality they had embodied. By reflecting together, the community began to internalize the lesson that ordinary humans could achieve extraordinary things when pushed to the edge. Emily also saw how the flood had reshaped priorities. Many residents realized that material possessions were less important than life, safety, and relationships. Families who had lost furniture or cherished belongings were grateful simply to be alive and together. Communities learned that mutual support, empathy, and collaboration mattered far more than individual possessions. Emily noticed that these lessons, though painful, had strengthened the social fabric of the town. People had discovered that their own actions could make a difference, not only for themselves but for the people around them. The aftermath also revealed personal transformations. Children, who had been terrified by the flood, were now more confident and aware. They had learned, often through observation or small acts of participation, that humans could rise to challenges even when circumstances seemed impossible. Adults, too, had discovered new abilities. Parents, volunteers, and neighbors who had doubted themselves were now capable of leading, organizing, and acting decisively. Emily saw that the flood had been not only a physical test but also a revelation of human potential. People had learned, in a visceral and unforgettable way, what they were truly capable of. Emily spent time documenting the events of the flood and the responses of the town. She wrote down stories of bravery, creativity, and selflessness. She wanted to ensure that the lessons learned would not be forgotten. There was the story of a single mother who had guided her children through flooded streets despite her own fear. The teenager who had navigated dangerous waters to rescue a stranded dog. The elderly man who had helped coordinate volunteer efforts despite exhaustion. These stories, Emily realized, were more than records. They were living proof of human capability, waiting to inspire others long after the water had receded. The community began to plan for long-term recovery and future resilience. Flood barriers were reinforced, emergency supplies were stockpiled, and networks were created to ensure communication during potential disasters. Emily helped guide these efforts, emphasizing the importance of preparation, awareness, and the belief in human potential. The flood had shown that people were capable of extraordinary acts, but it had also highlighted the need to recognize and cultivate that strength before a crisis arrived. The town, through reflection and action, was learning to be stronger and more self-reliant. Emily also reflected on the emotional journey. She realized that fear and courage were often two sides of the same coin. During the breaking point, fear had been overwhelming, but it had also been the catalyst for extraordinary action. In the aftermath, as people reflected on their experiences, fear transformed into understanding, appreciation, and self. Residents recognized that their reactions, whether brave, hesitant, or panicked, were all part of being human. The flood had revealed the terrifying and inspiring truth about humans. They often do not know their own power until life forces them to confront it. The town began to celebrate small victories. The streets were cleared, families returned to their homes, and children played cautiously near safe areas. The flood, which had initially seemed like an unstoppable force, was now a memory, though one that would not be forgotten. Emily noticed that people were carrying with them lessons about courage, resilience, and the importance of community. Ordinary people had discovered extraordinary abilities, and these discoveries would shape how the town approached life and challenges in the future. Emily also spent time thinking about her own role in the events. She had acted decisively during the flood, coordinated volunteers, and supported her neighbors emotionally and practically. Yet she recognized that her actions were only part of a larger tapestry. The bravery, initiative, and creativity of countless ordinary residents had made the difference. The flood had not created heroes. It had revealed them. Humans, Emily reflected, often underestimate their own potential. Crisis does not create courage, it uncovers it. The aftermath became a time of quiet contemplation for the town. Families shared their experiences over meals. Neighbors discussed the lessons they had learned, and children asked questions about what had happened. Emily encouraged storytelling as a way of processing the trauma and understanding the lessons. Each story reinforced the idea that humans had hidden reserves of strength, courage, and creativity. The flood had forced the town to confront not only the power of nature but also the latent power within themselves. One evening, Emily stood by the river, now calmer and returning to its usual path. She thought about the weeks that had passed the rising waters, the chaos, the breaking point, and the resolution. She realized that the flood had left the town scarred physically, but enriched it in ways that could not be measured. Humans had learned, through direct experience, what they could endure and achieve. They had faced fear, acted under pressure, and discovered capabilities that had been dormant. Emily understood that this revelation, the awakening of human potential, was perhaps the most important outcome of the flood. As the town continued to rebuild, Emily noticed a subtle but profound shift in the community. People were more attentive to one another, more willing to cooperate, and more confident in their own abilities. The flood had left them with scars, but it had also given them knowledge, courage, and a sense of shared purpose. Emily felt that the most important lesson of all was this: humans often underestimate the power they hold within themselves, and it is only when tested by extraordinary circumstances that this power is fully revealed. In the weeks and months following the flood, the town slowly returned to a new normal. Life resumed, but with a deeper appreciation for resilience, preparedness, and the capacity for courage that lay within ordinary people. Emily continued to teach, now using the flood as a living example for her students of human potential, bravery, and the importance of community. She shared stories of neighbors helping neighbors, families taking action despite fear, and ordinary citizens performing extraordinary acts. The flood had ended, but its lessons would live on, shaping lives and inspiring courage for years to come.